Step into the realm of daring ideas and transformative dialogues. This is Voices from the Edge, the podcast that pushes boundaries and ventures beyond the ordinary. Here, we confront the crucial issues that shape our world today. From the heartbeat of community challenges to the untold chronicles of leadership. From the relentless pursuit of social justice to the essential lessons in safety and lifelong learning. Voices from the Edge takes you to the crossroads of change. Because the edge is not just a boundary, it's where growth happens. It's where the real conversations begin. So lean in, be inspired, and let's explore what lies beyond the edge.
And joining us today is the marvellous Darryl Johnson.
Darryl Johnson, owner and director of Mental Health Journey Australia, is a registered nurse with postgraduate qualifications in mental health nursing and occupational health and safety. Additionally, he holds qualifications as a Trainer Assessor. With extensive experience spanning industries like manufacturing, the Australian Army, oil and gas, and mining, Darryl is a passionate advocate for workplace mental health. His belief in the power of education to break the cycle of mental health-related workplace issues drives his work, complemented by his current role as a mental health nurse at Royal Perth Hospital.
Darryl, how are you?
Yeah, good thanks, Tom. How are you going?
Excellent, excellent. Darryl, I've brought you on today to talk to us about workplace behaviours. You're from Mental Health Journey Australia?
That's correct. Yep, that's the name of my business, Mental Health Journey Australia. And we're specifically around mental health education within the workplace, and that covers everything from stigma through to psychosocial hazards, psychosocial risks, and especially workplace behaviours, which is why I'm here today.
Excellent. Can you tell us a bit more about workplace behaviours?
Well, workplace behaviours have such a big impact, either good or bad, on people within the workplace. As I travel around industries, especially in Western Australia, I find workplace behaviours as one of the number one issues that businesses, CEOs, leaders are really grappling with. It always comes up in conversation, and these workplace behaviours, unfortunately, are mainly on the bad side. Below the line behaviours is a common term.
Okay. What sort of behaviours are we talking about then?
One of the big ones is bullying. Bullying behaviour is really still quite prevalent within workplaces. Another one, which is quite unfortunate, is around the harassment and sexual harassment. And, sexual harassment, we've seen such an uptick in sexual harassment that we had back in 2020, the Respect at Work report by the former Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins. And by the way, you can actually go on to YouTube and Google her and have a look at the video she did after that report. 900 plus pages, 50 plus recommendations from government, business and organizations to improve on sexual harassment. We're having one in a third of our workforce being sexually harassed within Australia today, and obviously the majority of that is female, and it's really poor behaviour.
Yeah, just on that, a couple of things that just came to mind while you were speaking there, Darryl. You talked about an uptick in sexual harassment. Do we know if it is actually an uptick or if it's just a more tendency to report this behaviour?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think that as we educate people around sexual harassment and what it actually is, we actually find that people are reporting, are very much trying to get this out into the sunlight. But sexual harassment itself is really interesting that, we do online inductions and they say, look, we can't sexually harass. I find it interesting that we don't actually break down what sexual harassment is. This is a major thing, because if you don't know what the behavior is, how are you going to stop it? And in regards to sexual harassment itself, there's almost 31 behaviors that can constitute sexual harassment. So if you don't define what those behaviors are and you don't want, and how are people going to know about behavior?
Yeah, I can understand that. Just on that, there's a couple of things that comes to mind. Sexual harassment. Is it a HR issue? Is it a safety issue? Or is it a police matter?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Tom, and definitely. And I actually had this discussion the other day. One of the things we found, I want to take a step back because it's one of the psychosocial hazards. And what we found is that when a workplace behavior happens in the workplace, HSE department actually never finds out about it. It's always handled by HR. And from the get-go, if we have a behavior, one of the key things that we need to ensure is it's not actually being caused by another psychosocial hazard. So there needs to, as it was prior, never the twain shall meet. Well, now HR and HSE actually have to be working together really well. So if it's in the workplace, they need to ascertain whether the behavior is standalone or being caused by a WHS or psychosocial hazard. What should happen then is HR will deal with the behavior and HSE will deal with the HSE side of the hazard. So, for example, if it's role overload causing harassment, etc. Is it a police matter? Well, that's a really good question. It definitely is a police matter. A lot of people are encouraged to report these things to the police. Unfortunately, they go unreported. And one of the real key points here is, what if someone's being sexually harassed by a coworker outside of work? And I'm not talking on a work trip or a crew function or anything like. I'm talking about actually out of work hours. What happens there? Because we're going to have some serious behaviors going on outside the work hours, but it could be a safety issue within the workplace during work hours, even if the harassment isn't occurring. So we really need to look at how we deal with these. It definitely is a police matter if that sexual harassment is happening outside of work hours and should be reported.
Yeah. No, I've always been curious about that because to me, illegal behavior is, I don't know, illegal behavior. And I wonder sometimes if we're tending to keep things in-house a bit too much. And I think that makes it difficult for whether HR or safety are taking a lead in the matter. I think it makes it's difficult for them to then make appropriate decisions about corrective action, shall we say. I don't want to say punishment or disciplinary action, but I think if we're not involving the police in criminal matters, you have to ask yourself, why aren't we? I mean, if police were involved, there are fairly clear guidelines of how things will go. And I'm not thinking about, passing the buck onto another agency to make it easy for HR or safety. But yeah, I wonder why sometimes we keep these matters in-house as much as we do.
A lot of it, that's a really good point. And a lot of it can be because there's a real power imbalance between the harasser and the person who's being harassed. That's an issue. A lot of people think that the behavior doesn't warrant a police intervention. However, if we neglect those behaviors, it could lead to something more dangerous. And just as an aside, I've been working with a workplace where, unfortunately, these behaviors have not been addressed, and they've led to threats of rape, which is obviously part of one of the behaviors in sexual harassment, actual sexual assault. So again, when we talk about behaviors, addressing those behaviors is immediate, but not only can the individual who has harassed someone be held accountable, especially if it's in a workplace within the courts, but the business itself can be held accountable if they do not have systems in place to deal with, report, or educate. so much as they can, their workforce. So if they don't have those systems in place, they can actually be held accountable as well. It's all about risk management.
Yeah. And I see in Queensland, their legislation is changing, their safety legislation is changing, where workplaces now have to be able to prove that they're proactively managing the risk of sexual harassment. And the key word there is proactively, because it's always been a reactive thing on most cases. You find that we might get the induction little spiel, and that's all you hear about it until something happens. And then we tend to manage it. So it will be a fairly big challenge for, I think, some businesses to be able to prove that they've managed it proactively.
Yeah.
Just on that thing about sexual harassment, is it a workplace cultural issue?
Yeah, really good question. And, that was intimated, especially within male-dominated industries, within the report itself, the Respect at Work report. And I do encourage all your listeners to have a look at that. And it was especially around male-dominated work environments. So I guess we're talking here, a lot of it on resource industry, etc. And we have this culture of blokiness, and certain things can be done, said, especially around the definition of sexual harassment, and people can find themselves in all sorts of stew, especially when you start educating people around what the behaviors are and what can be deemed sexual harassment. You can, especially when I deliver training, you see the little lights come on. Oh, wow, I'm being sexually harassed, It is, I mean, forgive me, it's not a laughing matter, but I get quite upset because, they don't follow this proactive route around sexual harassment. And again, back to the Respect at Work report, they've actually stated we are not proactive. We have always been reactive. We need to ensure that our policies and procedures are proactive, and that we are looking after people within the workplace, whoever it is that gets sexually harassed.
Yeah. Do you ever find on the flip side that you might have people who get the light bulb moment in so much as I'm actually technically sexually harassing someone?
Yeah. I believe I do. There's been a couple of comments to me on the side as, this has been really enlightening, especially for me as a leader. I really did not, I thought I did, but I did not understand what sexual harassment was.
Yeah.
And, leadership is such an important aspect of this. And our behaviors, our words, especially when we're dealing with situations, is so important.
Yeah. We'll come back to leadership in a moment because it's just certainly it's a good avenue to go. But I just want to take it back a step or so. We talked about bullying and harassment before we got into sexual harassment. All right. What's the definition of bullying for Darryl Johnson?
Well, bullying is a repeated, unreasonable behavior which is aimed at an individual or a group of people, and behaviors that a reasonable person, that reasonable person test, would see as unreasonable. And the people that that we look at that suffer the most bullying, obviously there's a gender aspect, there's a cultural aspect, and there's also contractors or people that are coming in and out of the business, etc. Sexuality as well. So there's quite a group of people that suffer this bullying. But like I said, the one key thing is that it has to be repeated, unreasonable behavior. And I think that's where people misinterpret bullying to harassment, victimization, etc.
Good. Because harassment technically only has to happen once. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. But someone can't have 25 one-off events. There's something obviously wrong there. No, with all these different 25 different people, so definitely that's why there's other behaviors such as harassment, aggression, etc.
Okay, back to leadership.
Yeah.
How do leaders manage poor behaviours in the workplace?
Yes. Look, I've seen it done really well, and I've seen it done really poorly. I think I'd like to end on a positive, so let's start with poorly. Uh, it's leaders who let comments slide. It's leaders who will be at a pre-start, whatever industry it is that you have pre-starts in, and won't pull people up for their comments. Won't pull people up when they're humiliating people. Won't pull people up for when we feel as though they're immature behaviors, and those behaviors can then lead to bullying, harassment, etc. So even though the behavior might be really small, it still needs to be addressed. Classic example is in a workplace they had some serious issues around workplace behaviors, bullying, etc. And we could trace it all the way back to people having an argument over who didn't clean the coffee cup and put it away. Something as minor as that down the track can lead to real serious issues within your teams. And when your teams have issues, they're non-productive because your team will split. So supervisors, as soon as they have that inkling that there's a behavior issue, need to dive on it. Now, one of the things that I've noticed a lot is around PCBUs. They talk about leadership. They talk about having good leaders, but they don't really support their leaders. What do I mean by that? If you are a leader and you don't know how to have a difficult conversation, you don't know how to de-escalate, then you're probably behind the eight ball a bit there, because leadership is all about managing different personalities. It's all about being able to lead your team. Whether you like certain individuals or not has nothing to do with it. There's a professionalism required there for leadership. You can't show favor, etc. But if you don't know how to de-escalate, have difficult conversations without people just seeing two people screaming at each other, then that's going to be an issue for you as a leader and your team. Now, it's really interesting. Number one skill that leaders require, whatever they're doing, is empathy. And empathy is that ability to put yourself in that person's position, especially on a decision you've made. So that lack of empathy, that lack of ability to be able to de-escalate a situation or have a difficult conversation, are skills which aren't invested in as much by PCBUs, yet it's a requirement under the law to be able to have appropriate leadership, and I consider that appropriate.
Yeah. Would you say it was one of the well, there's a few challenges I can see frontline leaders in. Number one is when you say about letting things slide, let's be perfectly honest. It's easier to let things slide and just hope they go away, and it's just than it is actually addressing it. Would you say one of the challenges is setting clear boundaries of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior?
Yeah, that's true. And one of the hardest things to do as a leader is set boundaries, and it's actually a skill. Yeah, it's a skill. So, and then, there's a bit of education out there on how you can set boundaries. What do you do when your boundaries are crossed? What happens then? So it's all about setting your boundaries, ensuring there's consequences for those boundaries being crossed, and making sure that you really stick to what you've said. If you don't stick to what you've said, then people are going, right, it's a free-for-all. I can do this again. And they'll just push more and more. So, yeah, you're 100% right. And, it's interesting that you raise this too, because whenever I deliver training around this, be it in statutory positions training or within leadership and mental health, etc., I always ask people, what is the most difficult part of your leadership journey? And I give, I give them a bit of a scenario. You're taken from the tools because you're really, really good at that job. You're taken from the tools, and you're placed into that position of leadership. So you go from a mate to a manager, and then you start your leadership journey. And I ask people, what is the most difficult point in that timeline? And my point is the most difficult point is when you come from the tools onto a management position. And how much do we invest in people at that critical point? Because that critical point is where you're going to succeed or fail, become a micromanager or good leader. And
Yeah.
we really need investment in that transition period for people coming from the tools to management, because I can tell you, having been there, it is probably one of the most difficult parts of leadership is that transition. And we need to invest in our people.
Having done that myself, I found one of the biggest challenges for me was to realize you can be friendly without having to be friends with everyone, and to separate that you had a group of friends that you work with before, but now you're in a professional position and you need to treat everyone exactly the same. You can't be doing the old favors or doing anything like that. You've got to be not only to be doing the right thing, but you've got to be seen to be doing the right thing in terms of workplace justice, and organizational justice. And that's difficult too. Just, I wanted to ask you a question. You talked about pre-starts toolbox, the meetings that are generally held in fairly industrial circumstances and in medical circles before work starts. And you talked about comment being allowed to slide. Now, I can tell you now, Darryl, one of the things I may have done in the past is pull someone up right there and then and tried to set the example to show that what's acceptable or not. I think there is a possibility in this day and age, and maybe I missed the boat back when I was leading, that could be actually construed as a psychosocial hazard itself. How do you feel about that? Actually, because there is it is literally you're embarrassing someone in front of their peers.
Yeah, really good point. And I think one of the best ways to handle, especially an inappropriate comment, is to shut it down. You don't have to embarrass the individual, and it's simply that's enough. No more of that, and move on. Redirect the conversation. Puts a padlock on that comment, and then you just can't not. You must follow up with that individual and explain to them that you pulled that up because it was inappropriate. You really don't. I've seen a lot of people in positions that in pre-starts that actually try to humiliate people and are quite successful. Unfortunately, some of those people were in leadership positions, and that's it's all right to get a laugh, but when you humiliate people, it really has a knock-on effect.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So yeah, you're right. So we need to be very careful about how we approach that, and calling up that comment and moving the conversation on immediately is the best way to do it, and then addressing that with the individual. Everyone knows that why that was pulled up, but you need to explain that to that individual, because if you don't, then they don't understand why, and that's where we learn a lot.
Do you find it hard for organizations to get their frontline leadership to be aware of, successful management and difficult conversations about poor behaviors if the senior management aren't also role modeling that behavior?
Yeah, that's awesome, Tom. Absolutely right. And one that really sticks out in my mind was doing some workplace behavior and psychosocial hazards training up in the wheat belt, and everyone was attending, and came to me that a message came down, the CEO is too busy. He's got a meeting. And I've gone, wow, we're setting the tone right there. Right at the forefront, right at the front should be the manager. I'm in this 100%. And there's no way I'm not going to be a part of this, and there's no way I'm not going to be leading this. That should be the attitude. Nothing is more important than ensuring a safe workplace.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
All right.
It's interesting too. Just on that, I'm a real believer in this, is that your CEO or whoever it is who runs the business can talk as much as they want about what they want within the business. They can talk till the cows come home. But unless your frontline managers who actually lead the teams believe it, understand it, and know how to implement it, then there's going to be no changes. Because your frontline managers, your leaders and supervisors who lead those teams, they're the real change makers in the teams. They're the ones that are going to change your culture. Now, I'm sure you've experienced this, and I'm sure some of your listeners have as well, gone to a workplace and you've seen really bad teams. But within the same workplace, you see some really good teams.
Yeah.
How do we get that disconnect? So those leaders, I think we need to invest more in them, especially around the behaviors and leadership itself, but behaviors, mental health, etc., is a real key.
Good. All right, we're coming to almost the close, Darryl, but I don't want to hit you with a controversial question, but I'm genuinely curious here. You travel around a fair bit and you deliver to industry all across lovely WA at the moment. Okay, what's your perception of business attitudes towards psychosocial hazards? Is it that they are genuinely taking on board the care and welfare of their workers? Or are they paying lip service to psychosocial regulations and treating it just as a tick box to hit the reasonably practicable definition under the Health and Safety Act?
Yeah, good question. I have seen both. Unfortunately, I have seen both. I work with some fantastic businesses, Perth Mint. They are doing amazing work around psychosocial hazards. A few local government authorities I deal with are doing really good work. They're focused on the psychosocial hazards. They're focused on the safety of their team. I've also seen some pretty bad, we just need to get the tick in the box, and I'll get flown up to run some education, and that will keep the regulator off my back for the next few months until the next inspection. I think, and I want to take a step back quite a few years around this sort of stuff, is when something happens within the workplace, especially if you're working remotely, lack of services, etc. Then if the proverbial hits the fan for someone from a psychosocial hazard point of view, mental health, etc. There was especially in one business I was in, there was the words were, the person needs to harden up. We can't get anything out here. They just need to deal with it. And on the outside, the business were very adamant around psychosocial hazards, but when the push came to shove, that all dissipated and we went back to our previous behaviors around this stuff. I think the majority of what I've seen within WA is there is a real proactiveness, and it's really heartening to see. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone understands the concept of psychosocial risk and psychosocial hazards, but there is a willingness to do something, and that is really heartening and gives me great hope, because we're at the start of a change in culture. One step. And, changing culture is pretty difficult.
Mm.
And we need to educate our managers, our supervisors, and then educate our workforce who are in their teams to get that change in culture. Because like I said before, your change makers are your supervisors and managers that lead those teams. So I would say overwhelmingly, I have seen a real proactiveness in WA businesses that really want to do the right thing to ensure the safety of their teams.
Excellent. Darryl Johnson, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Voices from the Edge. If you like what we are doing, like the episode in the podcast, subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes and leave a positive review.